Genshin Impact's quests are often quite varied, with some being more lighthearted while others have a more serious tone. Much of the Archon quests or stories that revolve around the main story often have deeper meanings or themes. And even the character lore seem to show a lot of tragedy amongst its characters. But among the many stories we've seen, there is one quest or storyline that is often misunderstood. This quest is the Reflections of Mortality quest, the first chapter of Raiden Shogun's story quest. So let's take a deeper dive into this story and see why this particular quest is largely polarizing. Before we get into that, if you want to see more Genshin Impact content, do consider subscribing to the channel. Most of you have undoubtedly played or are at least familiar with the Raiden Shogun story quest, where you take her to drink dango milk and read novels, right? This particular story quest has on several occasions been met with some criticism. The quest essentially had the player walk around Inazuma City with Raiden A and do a combination of seemingly random things. The benign string of activities made it feel like a throwaway quest that was more akin to a dating sim that Hoyoverse threw together in order to have more people feel attached to the character, possibly to boost sales or something. But is this really the case? Now, first off, this isn't the first dating sim like quest that we've gotten. In the past, this sort of activity or theme of story quests has been done with characters like Lisa, Ayaka, and quite a majority of the hangout events. During Lisa's quest, for example, we were brought around Mondstadt under the guise of doing errands. On Ayaka's quest, the traveler accompanied Ayaka to a fair, playing on the typical trope of a really busy friend who has never had fun and now finally gets to go. The point is that other similar quests exist that outright create these situations and aren't apologetic about what they are. Your goal during the Ayaka questline though was really just to have fun and show Ayaka a world outside of her immediate responsibilities, something she was burdened with from a very young age. So what might appear as random everyday activities might actually have purpose to them, such as with the Raiden Shogun questline. As I mentioned, your first impression of the quest upon completing it is that you might feel that Hoyoverse are trying to redeem the character despite Raiden Shogun's rather negligent behavior as a leader that we experienced during the Inazuma Archon quest. As I completed this quest, even I felt this was the case, but upon reflection, there is an underlying message or reason here that might not be immediately apparent. During the Raiden Shogun quest, the traveler brought A around, showing her Inazuma City, its people, and capped off the night by taking a picture of her. It's important to remember that this happened right after A had repealed the Vision Hunt decree and was re-examining her view and approach to achieving eternity. The story quest acted as a way to cement the evidence that her initial approach to eternity was flawed. While the activities involve reading novels, buying snacks, and talking to the general public, at least in the first half, the point of each of these activities was to show A how the simplest things evolve and are subject to change given enough time, and rarely do things stay constant. One of the chapter's names even hints at this: the fabric of constancy. The lesson was that evolution is a part of life. It served to reintegrate A to the ways of her own country that has changed since the time she was out and about, and to show her evidence that change is not necessarily a bad thing. The outcome of this event wasn't a boomer enjoying novels. Well, to some degree it was. But instead made her realize that, like the picture we took of her, both her and the person in the picture existed as different forms, but there is only ever one of her. The picture is a parallel to Inazuma itself, where in A's mind there exists a version of Inazuma that to her is perfect and eternal, but there is also the Inazuma that exists in its current state in the present. It served to further her understanding that she might have held on to her vision of the past for too long in her attempt to achieve eternity, even if it was for Inazuma's sake. The goal was also to further convince her that her initial views of eternity were flawed and required a more thorough examination. The quest largely accomplished this as A acknowledged this herself and strived to find a balance between eternity and the positive outcome that change had provided. Keep in mind that changing her opinion wasn't an easy thing to do, despite how it may have seemed. The whole reason she pursued eternity was due to losing those closest to her. While she mentioned eternity on several occasions, what I think she really meant was never having to experience loss ever again, and she genuinely wished this for her people. Her actions were no doubt extreme, bordering on the tyrannical, but for most of her time serving as a Kagemusha, the intricacies of problem solving for her just revolved around using the shortest route or the most direct solution possible. I think this is why Makoto also went to a lot of trouble, as we see in the second chapter of a story quest, to ensure A had a more rounded off approach to governing Inazuma. Consider the outcome if A did not realize this notion of change and evolution. She might have regressed once faced with another loss and could have resulted in an outcome that could have led to even more suffering for the people of Inazuma. Having her realize these things was an important step in preventing the past from repeating itself. A benign outing with her is actually a smartly veiled attempt at making an old guard realize the value of change and accept it as something positive. I'm sure most of you experience this in one way or another when someone tells you that anything new is not worth doing, like maybe at your job, for example. Now, given my view and explanation of this, I could very well have read too much into this quest, and perhaps a pseudo dating sim to boost sales was really what Hoyoverse was aiming for. But given some of the more serious themes other storylines have tackled, a part of me hopes this just isn't the case. The overall story in Genshin Impact is not yet over, and there are 3 more regions slated to be released before the game is considered complete. I like the idea that the world we are experiencing isn't as simple and as straightforward, with some deeper meaning to its story and characters, and I do admit I might occasionally read too much into something in pursuit of this. The idea that the world is fleshed out enough between the major storylines that give the world a better sense of being lived in, and that stories that appear simple and easy can have deeper meanings, is one that I really enjoy. Having been shown how Inazuma has evolved even under the oppressive rule of the Raiden Shogun shows that people in general are resilient, and that good things like novels and dango milk can come from a desperate and hopeless situation. Ultimately, the goal of this video was just to share my thoughts on what I think the message was, but as I mentioned, the idea that it could just be a simple way to make people like her character is just as likely. There's nothing wrong with enjoying the aforementioned quest as a dating sim or whatever if you liked seeing it as something simpler, but for those of you who wanted a bit more depth, I hope this has helped you in some way. But that does it for this video, and if you enjoyed it, do consider liking and subscribing for more Genshin Impact content. I'll see you in the next one, and as usual, have a nice day.